We've got an indication with regards to when Mikel Arteta might be able to select Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli again. In other news, water is wet and Arsenal have been fined by the FA. In the words of Jose Mourinho, I prefer not to speak. If I speak, I'm in big, big trouble. All of that and plenty more to come on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how are we? Welcome back to the pod. Hope you're all having a wonderful Tuesday so far. It is freezing cold in London. Freezing. Now I say that a lot because it's often the case here. But this morning, I don't know, I'm feeling a sort of slightly harsher chill. I've got my hot cup of green tea with me, which I will be sipping on throughout this episode of the podcast. More than anything, just to stay warm. Didn't think ahead this morning and get myself down to the office to put the heating on ahead of time. I normally do that. I don't know what happened today. I just dropped the ball and now I'm wrapped up like an Eskimo indoors trying to bring you a podcast whilst stopping myself shivering at the same time. Good morning to everybody that is in the live chat. So good to see so many of you with us. We've got Wes Bird who says hit the like button, and morning Harry and all you gorgeous people. Yes, please do hit the like button. That stuff really does help. We've got James who says morning all, hope you're all well. We've got Leroy, we've got Wandering Minstrel, we've got Deanie Man joining us from Guyana. Cheers to you, mate, and everybody else over that part of the world. Green tea, says Wandering Minstrel. Yeah, I'm on the hype. I'm on the green tea thing recently. Junior says, good morning, Harry and fellow Gooners. And we got Derek who says it was -5 here in Lancashire. And there's me moaning about, hold on, let me check what the temperature is here in North London, because it's bad and I'm feeling it and I'm shivering. Maybe it's because I'm tired as well, but it's 4. It's 4, not minus anything. It's 4 degrees Celsius. So it ain't that bad, really, is it, in the sort of context of things? But for me, it's cold. Maybe because I'm tired, I'm feeling it a little bit more than I normally do. I don't know, but nobody really cares about how cold I am. People want to hear the podcast. And so let's get on with it, because we've got quite a bit to get into again today. Just a quick recap of what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be talking about the fitness of Gabriel Martinelli and Bukayo Saka. When can Mikel Arteta expect to have those two available for selection? We'll also discuss the latest FA charge that's come Arsenal's way. And of course, we'll get into a couple of other bits and pieces as well, because Liverpool are in action on Wednesday night. They go to Villa Park and they're going to be without a quite key player, I would argue, this season for that one. That's been confirmed by Arne Slot. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about Raheem Sterling, because he might not be delivering on the pitch, but there's some really positive stuff coming out of about him from some other kind of sections of the media that I think make for interesting reading. So we'll touch on that. We'll make sure we give everybody a fair hearing here on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. But without further ado, let's get into our first story and let's discuss then that FA charge. So Arsenal have been charged by the FA £65,000 for behaving in an improper way around the 43rd minute, relating to Myles Lewis-Skelly's ridiculous sending off. Now, according to the FA's official statement, the club have admitted to it. And that is simply, in my view, because there's just no winning with these people. What's the point in fighting it? Like, what's the point in appealing it? You lose your appeal, the punishment gets more severe. And the truth is, once they've made their mind up that they're going to do you with this type of charge, you ain't really got a way out of it, have you? You're kind of stuck. So, yeah, look, club admitted to it, as I think they would in those circumstances, because they've probably realised from previous experiences that there's just no getting away from it. I'm not going to read you the entire statement. You can find it on the FA's website. But they do say the fact that the referee's decision was wrong makes no difference here and didn't come into their thinking. Well, of course it bloody does, because protests are justified if they're for the right thing. And it's not like this is not like a political thing, right, where you've got two opposing parties and their followers and sort of party members are protesting against one another. And actually, it's just two different opinions. This was factually incorrect from Michael Oliver. This was a bad decision, one of the worst decisions that we've seen this season. I don't want to go any further back than that, because there have been some real stinkers, and that doesn't paint the PGMOL in a particularly good light. But as far as this season goes, that's up there with the very, very worst decisions. And we've been on the receiving end of a fair few this season, so we would know, right? Of course, the FA's decision to overturn the red card makes a difference here, because there was a feeling of injustice. There was a feeling that it was a clear and obvious error made by the referee, which was backed up by the FA and one of their independent regulatory commissions as well. And so, unless you overstep the mark, unless you really push the boundary, like, it's not like someone went over and angrily screamed expletives in the referee's face in the way that sometimes you see Erling Haaland do. It's not like Mikel Arteta went sprinting over to Michael Oliver and squared up to him in the middle of the pitch. It's not as if somebody overstepped the mark so badly that actually the FA have been left with no choice. Because if that was the case, if it was the case of, well, Arsenal did really go over the top here, okay, the decision was wrong, but they still had no right to behave like that. I'd kind of go, look, I disagree, because I think that in the grand scheme of things, the players were right. You kind of know, I think when you're on the pitch, you get a sense of what's gone on. You kind of sense his tingle, and you can kind of figure out whether you're appealing for something because you're being hopeful, or whether you're appealing for something because your gut tells you that it's completely and utterly wrong. This was completely and utterly wrong. And the appeals, in my opinion, while quite strong, obviously, never overstepped the mark. Never overstepped the mark in any way, shape, or form. And so for us to be charged, I think, is really unfair. And again, it comes back to that point around consistency. It's not just about the refereeing or the standards at which the sort of officials are operating. Actually, it's about the retrospective actions that follow as well, because it feels like Arsenal are, they've got to be top of the list when it comes to FA charges over the last few years. I'd love to see how much money the FA have recouped from Arsenal over the sort of the last few years in terms of fines. As I say, club admitted to it, not because I think they believe that they were in the wrong, or Mikel Arteta believes that his players were in the wrong, or the players believe that they overstepped the mark, but simply because they just don't think they can win. And so why risk getting a bigger fine? Just pay the £65,000. And it's not the point of, how much money £65,000 is, right? Some people would look at 65,000 quid and go, well, it's not that much money in the grand scheme of a Premier League football club, etc., etc. But it's the principle more than the money, isn't it? Surely. So yeah, look, really frustrated by that, really irritated by the decision, because, as I say, in this instance, the protests were justified. That's not always the case, but that was certainly the case here. So yeah, as I said right at the top, water is wet and Arsenal have been fined by the FA. Surprise, surprise. Let's move on. According to John Cross, the Mirror's chief football writer, Mikel Arteta is hoping to have Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli back after the next international break. He says they could return to face Fulham on April the 1st. So looking at this, it's quite clear if this is indeed accurate, and John Cross is pretty good, so I'd imagine that it is. If this is accurate, Arsenal hoping for Bukayo Saka to return in March, it's probably not going to happen. There was a hope, there was a feeling that maybe, he could step up his recovery, unless Arsenal are playing the classic tell everybody that he's behind when actually he's ahead of schedule, etc., etc. There's a part of me, though, that feels that when you suffer an injury as serious as a hamstring tear and you have to undergo surgery, that you can't really cut corners in terms of the recovery process. And you've got to be really, really careful, particularly with a player like Bukayo Saka, who I think would have been in the red zone for a while before actually sustaining this injury, and a player of such importance to the team. So a March return, which was mooted previously and was used in a lot of ways as a justification from some for the club not to go out and do any business in January, that is now looking unrealistic. And it looks like he's going to be back in April. Okay, the beginning of April. April 1st is the game that we're aiming for, which would be great. But it still means that he's going to miss the entirety of March. And there was a hope, I think, as well, after the sort of Martinelli injury and after some initial reports came out saying that he'd be out for over a month, that maybe his injury wasn't as bad as first feared and that actually he could be available sooner rather than later as well. But again, it appears that is not the case. So we're going to have to be patient with regards to the returns of these two. Games they will miss then West Ham at home coming up at the weekend, Nottingham Forest away, Manchester United away, Chelsea at home, and both legs of our round of 16 tie in the UEFA Champions League. So some pretty bloody big games in the context of our season. Am I disappointed to read this? Was I disappointed to read this last night when it came up on my timeline? Yeah, of course. But there was always a part of me that felt that March for Saka, and I think I did say that, felt a little bit too soon. For Martinelli, I hope that maybe the injury wasn't quite as severe. He hasn't torn the hamstring. He hasn't had to go through any surgery or anything like that. So, yeah, let's see what happens with all of that and how quickly we can get those guys back. But again, as I say, I hope that Martinelli will be back sooner. That's obviously not going to be the case. It looks like those two are going to miss West Ham, Forest, United, Chelsea, and both legs of our round of 16 tie. And that is massive, really, isn't it, in the context of our season? Just going back to the previous story and touching on this one as well, because there are some comments in the live chat that I want to touch on with regards to first the FA charge that we just discussed. Siva says, I'm a lawyer here. And I can see the logic by the FA. Don't agree with it, though. There is a process for appealing bad referees' decisions, and the FA can't condone players resorting to protesting on the field. I understand what you're saying, Siva. I do. But I just think that if something is wrong, and it was clearly wrong, the FA themselves said it was wrong, there has to be then a level of acceptance that the appeals were justified. You have to, for me, you have to factor that in. Now, does it mean that we're giving players free rein and license to storm onto the pitch and sort of give it to the referee, get really aggressive in his face and be really sort of pushy about? No, there's a line. I just don't think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I just don't think Arsenal crossed that line. I think it was a strong appeal over a decision that the players felt really, really strongly about, and that has since been proved to be completely and wildly inaccurate. And for that reason, I'm not saying that you should let players get away with murder and you should let players really kind of push that boundary. But what I am saying is, when you've already found the decision to be wrong, I think you then have to accept that there was going to be a certain level of appeal and frustration on the pitch. Again, it doesn't condone screaming in referees' faces. I remember a few players walking up to him and sort of asking the question and being a bit like, come on, ref, what the hell was that? And some hands on heads and things like that. I don't remember it getting to the point where it really, really needed, an FA sort of intervention here, which is what we've got now in a 65,000 pound slap on the wrist. I don't know. Steve says, I'm in a minority. I side with the FA over this one. Arsenal were guilty. Two wrongs do not make a right, Harry. Let's not forget the refs at the grassroots level. So, look, again, I don't think Arsenal crossed any lines. I don't think Arsenal crossed any lines. I don't think, but then it comes back to the point that I made a little bit earlier, doesn't it? And the point that we made at the time around consistency. If everybody that appealed against decisions in that manner was fined and charged by the FA, because there's been countless examples of it over the course of the season that have not resulted in FA charges, then fair enough. If you're going to come down like a ton of bricks on clubs, do it to everybody. And that's my big frustration around this, right? More so than Michael Oliver making a mistake and us paying the price for being a little bit over the top in our appeals against it. My big frustration is the lack of consistency, whether we're talking about the standard of officiating, whether they book people for certain things or not, and whether we're talking about the FA and their retrospective charges and action, etc., etc. So I get what you guys are saying. I just don't feel that we crossed the line. I just really don't. And I stand to be corrected. If anybody's got a clip or anything that suggests otherwise, then I'm happy to look at it. From what I remember of it, I don't remember it being that mad and that wild. I remember the online reaction being quite strong. And I remember sort of the PGMOL coming out and condemning sort of the abuse suffered by Michael Oliver. I don't remember them coming out and condemning equally as vile abuse received by Michael Oliver post the Merseyside derby. But it comes back to that thing again, doesn't it? When it's Arsenal, we're being looked at differently. We absolutely are. We're not paranoid. We're not making this up in our heads. It's fact. You can see it. Let's touch on those injuries again then, because lots of you getting in touch about those. Malarkey says, with our injury problems, the top 4 finish isn't guaranteed. I don't think anything's guaranteed in football, but I do think that we should absolutely have enough, even with the injuries, to finish in the top 4. If you look at it now, Bournemouth are in 5th and they're 10 points behind us. Do you expect Bournemouth to make up 10 points against us over the course of what remains of the season? Chelsea are also on 43 points. Do you think they can muster up a 10-point swing? I don't see it. Newcastle 41, so they're 12 points behind us. Can they turn it around? I don't think so, guys. I don't think so. I think it's not a guaranteed, and I'm not sitting here saying we've done it. Don't worry about it. Be complacent. All the rest of it. I think it is obviously still up in the air to some point, but I think Arsenal still, even with their injury problems, have enough. That's just my opinion. Imran Aline says, get Martinelli fit and prepare him for potential suitors in the summer transfer window. Clearly wants to see Gabriel Martinelli move on. Listen, I love Gabriel Martinelli. I think he's got so much going for him. Do I think he's always producing the end product that I want to see from my winger? Do I always think that he's top level? No, I don't. I don't. I think that there are potential upgrades out there. I think there are players that probably give you a bit more productivity, I should say, in that final third. But I really like what he brings to the team. I love his work rate. I love his work ethic. I'd love to keep him around the squad. If you're going to move one of them on, in terms of those left wing options, I think you move on Leandro Trossard first because of so many reasons: age, form, etc., etc. I think he's the one that you look at moving on first, in just my opinion. James D, just going back to that fine, says the players never crossed the line. Yes, they surrounded him. No one touched the referee, and it was mainly Big Gabby and Martin, our captain, speaking to the ref. Yeah, I think that's right. Andrew says or suggests that we're potentially rushing Bukayo Saka back too soon and that we should give him until next season before he plays again. I don't know. If he's ready, we need him. So if he's ready, bring him back. If he's not ready, then don't bring him back. Like, only the medical team and Bukayo Saka, really. Not even the medical team. I've got some sympathy for the medical team because, they do what they do and they diagnose issues and they monitor recoveries in the way that they can. But only the player really knows what he's feeling. And if you're a member of a medical team, if you're a club doctor and you've got a player knocking on your door saying, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go, who are you to say, no, you're not? Like, you can say it to a certain point and to a certain degree, but when the things that you're checking, i.e. the metrics that you look at, are looking positive, only the player knows if he feels quite right or not. And that's where I've got a bit of sympathy for them. I've heard a lot of people over the years, when Arsenal have suffered with injury problems, go, well, this doctor's crap and that doctor's rubbish and all the rest of it. You wouldn't be a club doctor at this level if you were rubbish at your job. It's simply very, 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 very difficult to monitor a recovery to that much detail, and the feeling, the way you feel, for instance. And it's not the same thing because I'm not an elite level footballer, but I remember when I came back from an ACL injury, and I remember my doctor and my physio saying, look, I think you're ready now to go and do a bit of exercise and go and do a bit of football and do this and do that. And I remember rejoining a team, and I remember going out on the pitch. I came on as a substitute, I think, for about the last 20 minutes as I was trying to build myself back up. And I remember coming on and going, this don't feel right. Like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I feel a weakness there. There's an inability to kind of sprint off away to my right using my left leg, which is the one that I've done as leverage. Like, it didn't feel right. And so even though the physio was doing this and doing that and doing the stretches and looking at this and looking at that and saying, oh, actually, it all looks good, for me, it didn't feel right. And if I wanted to, I could have said, no, I feel fine, just to get me starting games again. But I didn't, because I knew that it didn't feel right. So the player has a responsibility as well on that. And that's why it's not always just on the medical staff and on the medical people. And this is a really good point that Michael makes, which I think kind of feeds into what I've just been saying. What people don't realize is that a hamstring injury like that plays on you mentally, and it can take time to fully trust yourself to go fully on that hamstring. Exactly. And it's the same problem I had with my knee. you know, I would sort of avoid certain movements. I would avoid turning in certain directions. I would avoid going into big challenges that were maybe 50-50 that in the past I'd have gone full pelt into. You're right. It's a mental thing as well. You need to overcome that as well. So yeah. Hacker says healing is a set time, but reacclimatizing the body to performance takes some time. So yeah, that's another really, really good point. Look, that's enough on the FA charges and on the injuries. Let's hope that those guys are back sooner rather than later. Let's move on to a couple more bits before we sign out for today's pod. Liverpool are going to be without Cody Gakpo for their trip to Villa on Wednesday night, as has been touched on by Arne Slot. Look, this is a game that I look at as a real potential banana skin for Liverpool. Is there a guarantee they drop points? No, but if you look at their upcoming fixtures, this and Manchester City at the weekend, they feel like massive games in the context of the title race. And if we can close the gap that little bit further, as we touched on in yesterday's episode, over the course of the next week or so, I think we put ourselves in a really good position going into the final stretch. Obviously, we have to play Liverpool at Anfield, right? And if we want to win the league, we got to beat them, right? So when you look at their lead that they have, you got to take 3 points out of it because we need to beat them. If we beat them, we take those 3 points off them, right? So look at it that way, right? Right now, don't look at it as 7. Look at it as 4. We need to make up 4 to put it in our own hands. We need to make up 5 really to put it in our own hands. That's the way I'm kind of processing it in my own head at the moment. But to be without Cody Gakpo is quite a big deal. I know that Mo Salah's been the one stealing all the headlines this season and the one that everybody talks about because of how relentlessly bloody good he is. But Cody Gakpo has got 16 goals across all competitions this season. He's got 8 in the league, 3 in the Champions League, and he's got 5 in the League Cup. So this is a player that has been of huge importance to Arne Slot and Liverpool this season. There is no question about that. And to be without him, of course, will be a huge blow for them. Is it enough of a blow that means that their chances of winning the match are significantly reduced? I don't know about that, but he is obviously a really important player and someone who's contributed quite heavily this season. And therefore, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of difference that makes. But yeah, look, we'll all be watching on, hoping that Aston Villa can take some points off them. Aston Villa have so often been the bane of our lives when in title challenges and chases. So let's hope that they can do the same to Liverpool tomorrow night. Really interesting night tomorrow night because you've got that second leg of Manchester City and Real Madrid as well taking place at the Bernabeu. Now that one kicks off at 8. Liverpool against Villa, or Liverpool at Villa, kicks off at 7:30 because UEFA insist that that's the case because it's a Champions League night. So you're able to watch the first half an hour of Liverpool Villa. If Liverpool winning, you'll be able to go, screw this. Let's jump over and watch the Real Madrid Man City game. I'm going to double screen it. I think that's the way to go tomorrow night. But yeah, just some interesting team news on the Liverpool side of things there. Right. One last point I want to touch on. Then I want to take some of your questions. So get them in the live chat. Pop them in from now. That will help me to pick them out as we work our way through what remains of the show. Okay, so he's not been doing it on the pitch, Raheem Sterling. That is clear for everybody to see. Okay, there's no doubt about that. However, there have been some suggestions and some reports over the last few days that I've come across in which it is said that nobody in the Arsenal squad has been a greater source of inspiration and encouragement for young Ethan Nwaneri than the former Liverpool, Manchester City and Chelsea man. And that is really, really nice to hear because, look, I'm not trying to justify the Raheem Sterling signing. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes and make you believe that Raheem Sterling has lived up to what we expected when he came in through the door. He hasn't. That is clearly the case, okay? But what I will say is this. You can't always fully appreciate or understand the value of a player as a fan because you don't see what goes on behind the scenes. And there's a couple of players, I think, in our squad that are like that. I think Jorginho is another example of that. We look a lot at Jorginho and what he can do on the pitch. And maybe sometimes we focus a little bit too much on his shortcomings, maybe that lack of mobility, physical presence, etc., etc. But we, I think, vastly underestimate what an influence he is behind the scenes in the changing room and on the training ground. And I think although Raheem Sterling hasn't delivered on the pitch at this moment in time, I think it makes sense that he would be quite a big sort of supporter and an inspiration for some of those young players, particularly those that play in the wide areas, because he's been there and done it. He's got the trophies, he's got the t-shirts, he's got the career to show for all these years in football. We touched on it a little bit the other day. I do think that Raheem Sterling has got to the point where, even though he's 30 years old, which isn't old, he's in a place where I think he's probably played too much football because his career started so young, and now I think he's suffering a bit of a burnout, and that's impacting on his ability to perform. Maybe he's not as hungry anymore. And how could you stay that hungry for that long if you've pretty much won it all? Look, I'm looking through his honours list now: 4 Premier League titles, an FA Cup, 5 League Cups, and two Community Shields. Like, he's done so much in the game. Represented his country at the highest level, etc., etc. I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm not justifying the poor performances on the pitch, but it doesn't surprise me to read, is where I'm going with this, that Ethan Nwaneri and him have got a good relationship, that there is a real connection there, that Raheem Sterling is one of his biggest supporters. It doesn't surprise me to read that. And so I'm not saying forgive the signing. I'm not saying sit there every week and give him a free pass, because actually he's doing lots of good, positive stuff on the training ground and behind the scenes. I'm just highlighting another example in Jorginho, where I think it's quite clear over time that he's a real influence behind the scenes. And I think Raheem Sterling brings us a bit of that as well, even if on the pitch he's not giving us at the minute what we're looking for. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting story. Gladiator Scoop says, yeah, Georgie's influence from an experience point of view is huge. You get that in your senior players when they aren't at their physical best anymore. Absolutely, completely agree. Right. Before we wrap up with a couple of your questions, just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. If you're with us on YouTube, if you're listening via the audio platforms, make sure you are subscribed, guys. That really, really does help. And please do leave us a review, because that also really, really helps. If we could get to 1,000 reviews on Spotify, and we're about 200 odd out from that, between now and the end of the season, I would be over the moon, and it would help me so much in reasons that I don't think as listeners or viewers you would ever really expect. But it does really, really help. Not only does it help you rank higher up in the searches, but it makes you a much more attractive proposition for brands and stuff when they want to get involved in your content. Because if you can show that you've got an engaged audience and you've got over 1,000 reviews on a very prominent platform, speaking highly of your platform and speaking highly of your podcast, I should say, that really, really does help. So if you are a Spotify listener, this is a call, especially to you guys. Please do leave us a review. It really, really, really does help. And if you're an Apple, the more we've got on there, the better as well. Right, couple of questions. Imran says, have Arsenal ever played 5 London derbies in the league in a row at the Emirates? I don't think they have. I don't think they have. I can't think of a time where that's been the case. Let's just have a quick look at if I can do a quick Google search and get anything up on that. I don't think I'll be able to find it very quickly or instantly, but looking at it now, you're right. We got West Ham at home. Then we've got Chelsea. Then we've got Fulham. Then we've got Brentford. And then we've got Crystal Palace. 5 London derbies on the trot at the Emirates Stadium. Arsene Wenger used to say, didn't he, that it was harder for a London team to win the Premier League because of the volume of derbies. And I tend to agree. Steve Stone says, are you concerned about the ramifications of City's victory with the Premier League on Friday? At the moment, Steve, not really, because I don't really completely understand what all of that means. I understand that they found that some of the associated party transaction laws or rules or guidelines are not fit for purpose. But every time we have this type of thing unfold, what we get is Man City posturing as if they've won, and then we get the Premier League posturing as though they've won. Now, they might have found that some of the Premier League's rules are not fit for purpose and probably need to be changed, tweaked, or adjusted. But it doesn't mean that Manchester City have done nothing wrong. And this is not the big case that everybody's kind of focused on at the moment. This is one that I think City feel that if they could come out on top of, would help them with the 115. But for me, I'm really struggling to decipher all of this stuff, because on the one hand, it's Man City posturing as though they've made these massive strides and won these huge victories. And then you've got the Premier League pretty much doing the same and dismissing the idea that actually Manchester City have got anywhere. So, yeah, I think the Premier League have got to be really, really careful here, because if they lose this, the 115 thing, if they, are having to change rules because clubs like Man City are sort of contesting them and stuff, what does it say about the power of the league? And you just open the floodgates to what is going to become the wild, wild west. And then it becomes about who can get the richest foreign investor in. That's who's going to win the league and all the rest of it. Honestly, guys, like, I love the Arsenal and I love the Premier League because I've grown up on it and I work on it and I cover it. And I love it so, so much. But it's been a few years now where I've sort of tried to, of course, focus on the Arsenal, but maybe detach from the Premier League as a whole a little bit and spend a bit more time watching the Serie A, for instance, which I really, really enjoy, because I just feel like the Premier League is becoming, the battle of lawyers more than it is the battle of players on the pitch these days. And it's just all becoming a bit of a mess. But yeah, let's see. Sports Genius says, Harry, thoughts on a salary cap to get rid of all the controversy? I am all for whatever makes the best competition. If this is what it's going to take, I'm fine. Should there be a salary cap with regards to how much revenue you make? I think that probably should be the way to go, because I think, clubs have worked incredibly hard over the years to be successful, to grow their fan bases and audiences, and then to kind of penalize them by saying you've got the same salary cap as Fulham, for instance. I don't think that works, but I do think it should be a proportion of what your income is, et cetera, et cetera. And there are lots of things that can be done, I think, to make the Premier League more competitive. I want to see homegrown players coming through and deciding games. I want to see coaching coming out on top rather than resource and finance. That's what the football purists like myself want, I think, if we all kind of really sit down and think about this. And I just think we've got to a place in the Premier League. Look who's won the league for the last however many years. Manchester City. Why is that? Because they've got incredible investment. Have they invested it right and smartly? Absolutely. And do they deserve credit for that? For sure. Because we've seen other footballing projects go to pot that have also cost a lot of money. Chelsea being a great example of that. But there is a correlation between those who spend the most and those who win. And, that might always exist and that might always be a thing. But if there's a way of leveling the playing field that a little bit more, I'm all for it. That's kind of my personal opinion on it. Anyway, guys, I am going to love you and leave you. Thank you all so, so much for joining me on this Tuesday morning. Not a great deal going on at the minute because Arsenal haven't got a game every 3 days, which is wild to think at the minute. We are back in action on Saturday. We'll start building up to that game against West Ham a little bit later on in the week. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest Arsenal news over the coming days, and we'll bring you some opinion pieces as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a review, and all the rest of it. I'll see you all very, very soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Goodbye.